Hey everyone, it's Short Fiction Friday. This week I read 3 different stories. The Chaney Legacy by Robert Bloch, Anything But Your Kind by Nicholas Royle, and The House by the Crabapple Tree by S. Johnson. Now before we get into it, I am coming down with a little bit of a cold, so I apologize if there's sniffles and coughs and so on. I'll try to edit out the worst ones. Let's start out with The Chaney Legacy by Robert Bloch. This was first published in the fall 1986 issue of Night Cry magazine. Our main character Dale, he's obsessed with old movies. So obsessed that he buys a house that once belonged to Lon Chaney Sr., so the guy that was in the silent movies. While he's cleaning up the house, he finds an old actor's makeup kit, which includes a mirror. And each time he looks into the mirror, he sees reflections of some of Lon Chaney's characters. And slowly they begin to take over his life. This story was short, pulpy, light fun. It really reminded me of the tone of like old horror comics. And I think it would make a good comic. Part of what didn't work about this story is that since these are such old movies and a lot of them aren't that famous, Bloch has to explain who all these different characters are. That's a little bit awkward. Yeah, this was a fun story. Not as good as the other Robert Bloch story that I've read previously in this season. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. I think that was quite a bit better. Okay, next story. Anything But Your Kind by Nicholas Royle. Now, before I get into this one, this story is barely horror at all, and there's no werewolf, which makes its inclusion in this anthology a little bit weird. It is the giant book of werewolves, and there's no werewolf. There is a werecat, so someone's turning into a panther. So our protagonist here is Gary. He's teaching a writing workshop, I think at a small college. And at this workshop, he starts to become interested in one of his students, one of the writers there, Catriona. And this story mostly just proceeds as kind of a romance story. There's an age gap, so they have to work at it a little bit to relate to each other. And there's no real horror elements. Not really. Now, it was well written and everything. I thought it was an okay story. But if your story is in the giant book of werewolves, and we've got this cover here, there's definitely expectations that there should be a werewolf, and it should be sort of focused on the horror of it. I don't know, I'm kind of in two minds about that. I think it's good for editors to kind of meet the expectations, not to be false advertising, essentially. But on the other hand, it is good to throw in a few curveballs, maybe to mix it up a bit, to try to introduce something new to the readers. I can understand that. But yeah, bit of a perplexing choice, really. The last thing that I read this week was The House by the Crabapple Tree by S. Johnson. Now, S. Johnson seems like a pretty obscure name. As far as I can tell, this might be the only science fiction story he ever wrote. I couldn't really find too much about him online. This is a post-apocalyptic story, presumably after a nuclear war. Society's crumbled, and we're following a few of the survivors. Our main characters are Sora and Viri. So that's a mother and daughter. They live together in a very primitive cabin in the woods. Viri's a teenage girl, and obviously her mother, Sora, is quite protective of her and always worried about what will happen. Through the story, there's a series of kind of barbarian warrior men who enter into the cabin, get into fights with each other, and treat the women badly. And you can kind of imagine where some of that goes. This is a good, bleak story. Especially at the start, it's very, very tense when one of these groups comes into the cabin and you're wondering what's going to happen next. How are these characters going to get out of this? How will they survive? But I feel that some of the tension wasn't really held throughout the whole story. So it probably could have been cut down just a little bit. Now, I think this is also one of the stories where you could have a bit of a feminist critique of it. Sora and Viri are kind of these helpless characters. They seem to have kind of just accepted their fate. And as a reader, you're kind of thinking, well, is this realistic? Shouldn't they have their own weapons? Shouldn't they be capable of fighting back even just a little bit? And as I was reading through it, I was thinking, is this what the Outlaw of Gore books are like, the John Norman ones? I'm assuming the Gore books are much pulpier and probably a lot creepier in how they handle the women characters. But yeah, still, when I was reading this, like, the thought popped into my head. Yeah, S.S. Johnson, this story was the best one that I read this week, but still with those quite glaring flaws, really. All right, and ranking the stories, putting them into my top 20. I'll put the full list up on the screen here. This week, none of the short stories will make the top 20. The House by the Crabapple Tree would be pretty close. It's probably top 30. But no, it's not going to get into the very top of the list. All right, let's select some new short stories for next week. The way this works is very simple. I've got book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The 6-sided die selects the book. The 12-sided die selects the story within the book. Okay, first roll. 5 and 3. That's the werewolf book. So the stories with pencil marks next to them, I've already read those. So we skip over those. 1, 2, 3. Rug by Graham Masterton. And that's 15 pages. Awesome. Really looking forward to reading some Masterton. I'm going to keep rolling the dice until I get over 50 pages. Second roll. 3 and 10. The werewolf book again. And I don't think there's actually 10 stories left in this anymore. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm just going to read the last one. Bright of the Moon by Joe Fletcher, which is actually just a short poem, so it's only 2 pages. Maybe I should read that one out loud on camera or something. Okay, we're up to 17 pages total. Third roll. 1 and 10. That's the war book. Once again, there's not actually 10 stories left in this book. So I'll be reading The Liberation of Earth, William 10. That's 20 pages. Okay, we're at 47 pages total. Fourth roll. 4 and 4. That's the werewolf book again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm reading Soul of the Wolf by Brian Mooney, and that's 25 pages. Okay, that Brian Mooney story takes us well over the minimum 50 pages now. I'll put all 4 selected stories up on the screen here. Lots of selections from the werewolf book this week. I'm really looking forward to that Graham Masterton. He's an author that's been on my list forever. I've got a ton of his novels here, and I still haven't read any of them. So yeah, really excited to finally read something by him. Go read these short stories if you have access to them. And I'll see you all again next week. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.